This is
The Science Lens,
the Faculty of Science podcast at the University of Manitoba. Together, let's discover the unknown and invent the future. Hello, I'm your host, Kimia Shatkami, Faculty of Science Digital Content and Communications Lead, and a proud UM alum with a master's in computer science. In each episode, we take a closer look at innovation, research, student experience, and the people who shape the future of science right here at the University of Manitoba. Whether you're a student, a researcher, or simply science curious, you're in the right place. In today's episode, we're going to answer some really interesting questions. Have you ever sat down to think where your science education can take you? Did you ever stop to think whether it was worth it to get a master's or PhD? Do you think you have to get out of Manitoba to do something big? Well, hold that thought, because our today's guest might surprise you. But before introducing him, I'm going to hand this over to Daniel Heschuk, who is the Faculty of Science Program Development Specialist at the Science Innovation Hub, and he's been with us since 2023. Dan has a Bachelor of Science in Genetics and a Master's in Biological Sciences, both from UM. Dan, would you like to introduce today's guest to our listeners?
Absolutely. Thanks, Kimia. So, with a PhD in physics from the University of Manitoba, Michael Lang specializes in cutting-edge advancements applicable to medical imaging and instrumentation. His doctoral research focused on hyperpolarized 129 xenon gas production for high-precision co-magnetometry, relying heavily on his expertise in experimentation, system development, RF coil design, magnetic field simulations, and automation of cryogenic and gas handling systems. Michael has worked on R&D efforts at the National Research Council Institute for Biodiagnostics and Imerys Inc., contributing to innovations in medical technology with focus on magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI. His experience also extends to regulatory affairs and system maintenance, ensuring the highest standards in the field. As a driving force behind Taumedis, Michael is committed to establishing the company as a global leader in intraoperative medical imaging solutions. He is passionate about forging industrial and academic partnerships, creating research opportunities for students and emerging professionals that lead to fulfilling careers, and giving back to the local community. So yeah, welcome, Mike.
Oh, thanks very much for having me.
As our first question, I'm going to ask how you came up with Taumedis' idea. Was it like the movies? Were you walking and then had that look in your eyes and stuff and was like, I found the next big idea, or was it more realistic?
It wasn't like the movies, at least not for me. So the history of the idea actually goes back a couple of decades, really. So I was fortunate enough to actually join this experienced team that was already working on this recognized problem, which was figuring out a new way to move full-sized MRI systems in an operating environment. And there were certain limitations to that. The group I joined, when I joined as a postdoc, they had actually identified this core problem probably over a couple of decades ago. And there's been some attempts at solving this problem. There was a former company in Winnipeg that was actually developed from the core group that I worked with, and I actually worked there as well in my undergrad. And we basically needed to come up with a new way to solve this moving magnet problem. It's a bit of an engineering task. So I joined the group. They were already working on this new development. And I was able to contribute additional insights to the problem, lend my own expertise to help elevate the project, and just bring my kind of diverse background in science and physics to the table to help elevate this and bring it to where it is today.
And I'm going to ask a follow-up of you. Can you please tell us what the problem really is and what you're trying to solve here?
Absolutely. So what we work on, our flagship product, is this intraoperative MRI system. So you may be familiar with magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI. It's a method to produce exquisitely detailed images of soft tissue in human anatomy. It's pretty well recognized as a gold standard in imaging for a lot of applications. And it really shines for things like neurosurgery, where you're looking at brain tissue, and it may be difficult to discern normal tissue from abnormal tissue based on just visual inspection. So it's often diagnostic imaging, such as MRI, that they use to diagnose or discern the differences in these tissues before, say, diagnosing someone and doing surgery or something like that. One of the issues going into an operation is that things tend to change. So you may have an image from before the operation or a preoperative image. But if you're doing, especially in the case of neurosurgery, when you open up the skull, things tend to shift around a little bit. There's changes in pressure, lesions, tumors, things like that might actually shift, move a little bit. We call that brain shift. So it's really important to be able to get updated images if possible. And ideally, you want to do those in situ. Once the patient is under anesthesia, they've been, the skull has been opened up, the surgery has already begun. You want to update those images. And so traditionally, what you would do is you would take the patient and you would actually move them to an imager, an MRI somewhere. It could be in an adjacent room if the operation suite was designed especially for that. It could be in a different building in some cases. And generally speaking, you don't want to move a patient that is currently in the process of having surgery, especially on such delicate organs such as the brain. So instead of moving the patient, there was this proposal to move the magnet, which isn't an easy feat because it's a very big, sophisticated piece of equipment. It involves cryogenics to maintain low temperature. And there's all sorts of factors. So basically, there was this issue of moving the magnet from one room into another and leaving the patient remaining stable the whole time. So this was a project that was developed. So there was this aha moment that you kind of alluded to, but it wasn't me. It was one of my co-founders, something like 25, 30 years ago. He told me the story about coming up with this idea with a neurosurgeon and writing it down on the back of a napkin in a bar outside of Calgary. So really, really interesting. There is a history there. But what we did is we basically came up with a better way to move the magnet. This other company that we all worked for had one method, but it was very expensive. It took a lot of time to implement. It required extensive renovations. It was often only used in new hospital builds, so where they're actually building a whole new wing of a hospital. And what we did is we came up with a method to move the magnet in a much more affordable way, reduce downtime for the hospital, so it takes less time to install, can be installed on a smaller footprint, so we can actually retrofit it into existing hospitals. Say they have a space that's already carved out as a surgical ward or a surgical room, a surgical suite. Unlike our competitor, we can go in there and we can actually kind of fill in the guts of that room with our system and retrofit it instead of having them basically shut down a whole area of a hospital for an extended period of time or even build a whole new one.
Oh, that's
really
incredible.
interesting.
Yeah. So before all of this, doctors would essentially be almost blind or having to move the patient in and out of different rooms to do these MRIs as they're doing an operation.
Yeah. So that was kind of the old school way of doing things. They would have their preoperative images. They would plan their surgery based on those images. And then they would go in and basically, they might cut into a patient and, it's possible to miss what you were originally seeking if circumstances have changed. So yeah, updating the images was critical. That was the first step. And they originally did that by moving the patient to a different room or a different wing. And then we've, come a long way since then. So most of the intraoperative MRI suites are built with an MRI in an adjacent room. So you just open some doors and you move the patient over to them. Or in the case of this other company, you move the magnet over top of them in a fairly complex way. And then we came along and said, let's simplify this whole thing and make it more accessible so that more hospitals, more surgeons, not just the tier one, hospitals that have a ton of funding and things like that can afford it, but we can really make this life-saving technology available to as many people as possible. Our co-founder, it was always his dream and vision that every surgical suite should have an MRI attached to it.
Yeah. Well, I feel like brain surgery is complicated enough. So if we can make it a bit easier, then pretty nice to be able to actually see what's going on.
Yeah, these surgeons are doing very, very long surgeries, tens of hours in some cases. It's incredibly demanding. And we should really be giving them the tools needed to do the best job possible. And And really, it's about the outcomes of the patients in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's back up now a little bit and go from Taumedis to actually how you got to where you are now. So how do you find that your higher education in science, how do you find it sort of shaped your career and led you to where you are now? And what were some of the courses and training or workshops that maybe had the highest impact on your career as it is?
Yeah, that's a good question. So very early in my undergraduate, which was in physics, I was exposed to different opportunities, different research opportunities. So you mentioned in my intro that I did some work at the NRC Institute for Biodiagnostics. That was here in Winnipeg. That was actually the first research that I ever got the opportunity to do at a university level. I think that was really fundamental for me. So this opportunity to step out of the classroom, step into the lab, do some hands-on work. That particular role had me starting out with some computer simulations of MRI-related hardware. And then at some point throughout that, they offered me the opportunity to actually build some hardware, which was really where my heart was. I've always been kind of a hands-on tinkerer type of person and, tearing things apart as a kid and maybe putting them back together and so forth and so on. So I quickly realized that I really like this hands-on application side of things. And that came from this research opportunity. So getting to do research at an undergraduate level and getting to learn where my passions lied was critical to help me kind of get to this point and having an idea of what I wanted to do. Things really have come full circle because I diverged a lot from sort of traditional MRI stuff as I got into my graduate degrees, but there was always this sort of hint of it in the background. And then once I got to the postdoc level, I had this opportunity to get right back into it. So working in the lab, working with a team, learning how to help different people, going to colloquium, going to different talks that were put on by my department, other departments in the university, departments at other universities or virtual talks. Those things, they really open you up to the landscape of possibilities. What kind of research is available out there? What kind of jobs are out there? I remember having a presentation from a patent officer, and I just thought it was fascinating that this was somebody who had, a high degree in science. I don't remember if it was chemistry or physics or biology, and then later went into becoming a patent officer, which is somewhat overlapping with legal side of things. And I've experienced a lot of this now in the business side as well. So that, those were really, really critical. And I'd say things like scientific writing courses and the fact that I had to write 3 theses. I did 3 thesis-based degrees, undergrad, master's, PhD. All of that writing, learning how to express yourself in the work you're doing, describe what you're doing, poster sessions, oral presentations, like all these different things had a massive impact on leading me to where I am today.
Wow, absolutely. Yeah, that's really cool to just sort of see how outside of the lecture theater or outside of your classes, it can be, even those experiences can be extremely impactful, and not necessarily just the presentations that are immediately relevant to your degree, but some of those other opportunities that you might seek out. Yeah.
It makes me really happy to hear that, because in communications, we work with different departments to make sure that students are aware of those seminars and lectures that are put up. And I think Faculty of Science does a great job of having many different talks and different disciplines for students to catch up on. Speaking of that, I think us being in communications, we get to kind of, make sure that students are aware of those opportunities, of those lectures and talks. And I think going to them is a really, really good practice of seeing good examples of people giving lectures and good examples of people giving talks. And that's kind of one of the softest skills that we need in science communication, and making sure that we can actually talk about our science and our work with people of all sorts of background. And so I wonder, for my next question, of what were some of the softest skills that you felt were the most necessary for you when you were in your education and then also in your career?
Right. Well, Well, as we sort of touched on, being able to communicate scientific ideas effectively to both experts and non-experts, to a broad audience is fundamental. If you can't articulate the value and utility of something that you're trying to bring to a market or get people to buy into, especially when we're talking about buying into, you say things like seeking funding for or support from, people have to believe in what you're trying to do. And for them to believe it, they have to understand it, at least at some level, how you understand it. So beyond that, clearly documenting your work is really important as well. Documentation skills help other people understand your work. So somebody should be able to ideally pick up your lab book and maybe have a sense of what you're doing, especially if they're in the same field. Maybe somebody needs to reproduce work that you've done. This, I don't know how many of you have actually tried to reproduce something that's been in a paper before, but often there are bits and pieces that may be left out at the discretion of the author. And you quickly come to a point where they say, and the next step is this, but you're not there yet. So clearly documenting your work, it helps you revisit your old projects too. Sometimes you work on something and you don't look back on it for months or years. And it can be a lot of effort to dig it up, and giving yourself some cues can be really helpful. So writing your ideas down, documenting them clearly, learning to tailor your explanation for your specific audience. So I've given talks to family members. I've given talks to colleagues. I've given talks to other students. I've given talks for business purposes, for funding applications, things like that. I gave a talk to the public library once, and it was mostly seniors. You have to know how to tailor what you're talking about to the audience that's listening. It's really, really important. And there's this joke, like, you should be able to explain your idea to your grandparents, and if you can't do that, you probably don't know it well enough. Yeah. So beyond that, teamwork, learning how to work with people, especially on complex projects. It's incredibly important to be able to collaborate and then take away your part, go work independently, still understanding where your part fits into the broader picture. And then beyond all of that, learning how to listen. So listening carefully to others before you respond, it usually just leads to better collaboration outcomes. Learning how to answer questions properly. And it's also important just to make sure that everyone gets a chance to be heard, especially in a business setting. People tend to want to have their ideas heard first, but sometimes your idea can be modified or maybe changed a little bit, the wording of it, right? If a bunch of people say things in a certain way ahead of you, maybe you understand better what they're looking for, and that gives you the opportunity to kind of modify, or tailor what you're trying to say towards them. So once again, it's about tailoring it to the audience.
Yeah, I have to say, in computer science, documentation really, really matters, because there are usually huge projects where a lot of people are working on, and especially if you're coding, you have to make sure that the document that you're creating for your teammates is different than the documents that you're creating for somebody coming in fresh into the project, to the document for a general audience. And documenting in a way that you go back after 5 months and still understand what you were doing and not have to start from scratch to understand even your own process really helps, really, takes you a long way.
I guess annotating your code, right? Adding details, but ones that aren't just relevant to you or trigger things that they're more general and broad so that other people can understand them.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. And those interdisciplinary skills, it's so important for students to know that the people that they're going to be working with aren't necessarily going to be their peers. In fact, a lot of times you go into a job where you're working with someone who has a law degree and not necessarily a background in science, or you're going to be working with somebody who is very focused on business. And oftentimes when you bring everybody together who have very different skills, they can really provide a much better end product But it requires an understanding, a mutual understanding of each other, the goals, the objectives, and also just insights that each person can bring. So yeah, that's really, I love that insight. That's so good.
It's like music. You know, you can play nice music on your own. You can play really nice music with a group of people with different instruments, but they all have to fit together and know their place and not try to play over each other, play in concert.
Oh yeah.
That's
Otherwise
true.
the drummer just takes over. And I mean, I do love a good drum solo, but it should be muting out the singer or the guitar.
That's true. That's very true.
Oh, so when it comes to sort of like creating opportunities for students and maybe to learn these soft skills, but also the technical skills and actually see where their science sort of fits in, how do you find that you're able to create opportunities, at least with Taumedis, to help students connect with industry or even just in your personal life?
Mm-hmm. So this really hits close to home for me, because the experience that I had as an undergrad, as a graduate student, in both academia and industry, getting these R&D experiences was really pivotal. As I mentioned before, you know, the work I did in the lab, these experiences I had and was provided, they really set me up on a path of exploration and interest. And unfortunately, I feel like since I was an undergrad, I've seen a bit of a decline in some of the local industry academia opportunities, maybe especially in things like physics, medical imaging, things like that. So compared to the earlier years, I feel like there's a bit fewer opportunities. I find that really unfortunate because I think about my path and how I got to where I am and how I wouldn't be here without having had those research opportunities at places like the NRC or IMRIS, or even just in the lab at the university. Getting to travel to other labs, doing research work internationally, things like that, going to conferences. So I'm hoping to rebuild some of these bridges and using Taumedis as a vehicle for that. We're already doing that, so we're maintaining really strong relationships with the local universities. So I'd say I have a fairly good relationship with the physics department at the University of Winnipeg. I was there for many, many years. I have a good relationship with the physics and engineering departments here, having worked with them as well, having done my graduate programs here. And we've already forged some partnerships with both faculties at the University of Winnipeg and University of Manitoba. And the goal would be to always have strong collaboration on research projects and joint funding applications, working with funding agencies like MyTax, who strongly support the academia to industry route. I took advantage of that myself. I was a MyTax postdoc. Before that, I actually had NSERC undergraduate student research awards for industrial work. I think with Taumedis, I'd like to create opportunities for students to start working on interesting projects early on in their academic career, and hopefully seeing a path towards commercializing those products or projects, having an idea of where those might go in an industrial commercial setting. And then by working with the students, joint research programs, research grants, funding applications, having research done at the academic level, but simultaneously integrating into industry, which is where we come in. Hopefully they will go through their degrees. They'll become a specialist in that specific, maybe it's a niche thing that only they're working on, which is really cool for them and for us. And then coming to work for us afterwards as a highly qualified personnel, who's really a specialist in that field, and helping to build that product or that sector up with us and staying in Winnipeg, staying in Manitoba, or maybe they start their own company with that idea. There's so much intellectual property out there to be had and so many different opportunities. And no matter what, whether they come work for us or start their own local company, there's going to be job opportunities and fulfilling careers available. And that's really what I'm very passionate about since I was given those opportunities. And I don't feel like they're quite as available now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I love to hear that, especially knowing that like there are jobs available for students, and sometimes again maybe having to create their own opportunities to stay in Winnipeg, because is a lot of talent that's being developed in Manitoba, and so often we find it either being like sort of steered away. They go to find a job in Vancouver or Toronto or elsewhere, or they resign themselves to, well, maybe I'm not using my degree for anything. And being able to hear that actually, no, like you can find a job or you can create a job solving a problem that you care about, and stay in Manitoba to do so is really inspiring and really encouraging to me.
Yeah. And as somebody who moved to Canada, lived both in Toronto and Winnipeg, I really, really adored the community focus of Manitoba, of how people want to build up the community, like you, creating opportunities for students. And I think that's really important, because a lot of students love to stay in Manitoba, in Winnipeg, and build up their community. But if there aren't as many opportunities, it leaves them with no choice. But someone like you creating those, I think, is really, really important. As my last question, I'm wondering, what is one thing throughout either your academic or professional career that surprised you the most? Something that you were like, "Ooh, wasn't expecting that one."
I guess one thing that I've come to realize throughout my whole academic and so far short but ongoing professional career is that titles and formal qualifications don't necessarily reflect competence or problem-solving abilities. And, it's a little bit of a polarizing thing to say. But I guess coming up from an undergraduate level, you always tend to revere the people who are at the higher level than you. So if you're a first-year student, the fourth-year students are doing the scary fourth-year courses, and they're, big and powerful. And then there's the graduate students, the masters, the PhDs, and then the professors, and so forth. I think it's important to not underestimate your abilities just based on your accomplishments on paper. So, I've encountered a lot of individuals with impressive resumes, but then they tend to underperform, in the real world, which doesn't make them bad people. Maybe they've become complacent. That often happens as well. But I've also known extremely some of the smartest, most highly skilled people I know who on paper don't have any credentials. They haven't gone to university, which is quite interesting too. Some of the people I know with the most inventions don't have an undergrad degree, but they could tell you anything. They could fix anything. So I'm not trying to undermine the value of higher education, because I really, obviously, I fundamentally believe in it. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here right now. I think more so, I'm trying to reinforce the idea that you shouldn't judge based on appearance or what's written on paper. And that really highlights the importance of communication, right? Being able to communicate your skills and your experiences, being willing to accept ideas from people who, may not have credentials that are thought as respectable, So if you're in a large group, listen to everybody, even the person who's only been there for a week, because for all you know, they have a life experience or an interest or a passion or a hobby outside of what you're doing that can be related to that in some way that you just never thought of. And so, yeah, some of the most impactful contributors to things are the ones you'd least expect. And I think that's something that has surprised me time and time again.
I think that's a really interesting take, especially like when you're working in a very diverse team and you're working with a lot of people to, if you're in that leadership position, to give everybody the fair chance of contributing, of talking out loud about their ideas and taking everybody seriously at the same level. I think that kind of contributes to then a more diverse set of ideas that then you can look at. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Absolutely. Last week I was giving a presentation to the micro students group, and one student after my presentation asked, so I'm just getting into research right now. What happens when it comes to, I see the professor or I see a graduate student, like, and they're wanting to do something that I know inherently is not the right way of doing this research, or they're missing something critical. Like, how can I, as like somebody, just raise my voice and like, just like kind of like ask about, like, I think that this is wrong. And I sort of like had to mention, like, just because you feel like you're like at an earlier part of your career doesn't necessarily mean that your ideas aren't valid. And I think that just being able to like even just find a respectful way of sort of just like acknowledging that, like, I think that there might be something missing. Also, even if you are incorrect, it provides them an explanation or an opportunity to sort of provide like an educational or clarification opportunity. But even if you are hating something here, then actually I think that they're going to be really glad to hear it. And it's just, again, communication is so key here. Being able to like readily express like your concerns, your ideas, or just your insights it's super important. And I think we're always better for it when ideas are shared rather than held in. Mm-hmm. So I really, really appreciate that response.
I think it's a learning opportunity, whether for one party or the other. It's always a learning opportunity when everybody has the chance to kind of, say their piece.
Absolutely. So we're joining the rapid fire questions now. So this is going to be a lot of fun, Mike.
Oh boy.
So question number 1, what is the biggest barrier in turning a business idea into reality? Funding, time, tech, or collaborations?
Oh boy. Funding is really a big one. It can be a really big barrier to overcome until you find the right people that resonate with what you're trying to do, who want to stand behind you. More than just funding, support, right? So it's having money behind you is one thing. Having people behind you, I think, is even more important. Awesome. In order to drive your project forward, and then recognizing that there's more to business and these things than just a great idea, right? Or a good product development. You can fail on so many different things, and you have to be kind of mindful of everything. So while the biggest barrier may be funding, or someone else may have a biggest barrier, there's so many different things that you need to be mindful of, whether it's legal or regulatory and quality management and marketing, all these different things that come up. And I mean, this is where, it's a team effort. So sorry for diverging from the one biggest thing, but
that's perfect.
No, that's a really good answer, though. Who was your science hero growing up? And if we don't know them, it's okay. You can just tell us.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I watched the usual people like Bill Nye the Science Guy growing up. Obviously, I think almost everybody who's into science did. But I was always really interested in food and cooking from a very young age. And so, interestingly enough, thinking about this question, I think my science hero growing up was actually someone called Alton Brown, who used to, or actually they just started again. It's a show called Good Eats. And he is not a scientist by background, but clearly loves science and would explain and optimize food concepts with science and with models, and develop these recipes and techniques for how to cook things in the most optimal way possible. And something about that just stuck with me. And I mean, to this day, I love his food content, and I can go back and watch any of those old episodes or the new ones, and I just get so much joy out of them.
I have a new show to watch.
Absolutely. Cooking is chemistry, biology, and physics all in one, hey?
That's right.
Absolutely.
Okay, so you are a fresh physics graduate. Give us your 30-second pitch about what makes you you.
So I'm going to say this from the point of view of physics in general, I think. So as a physics student, I really needed to develop a variety of useful skills that make me an excellent candidate for the professional world. Solving problems in physics, in science in general, requires the ability to apply techniques or approaches from many different perspectives, different angles, and coming up with one or more viable solutions, and then comparing those solutions. So that's really important, and something that makes physics students really candidates for a professional world. And beyond that, when you study physics, it really teaches you how to learn new skills. So you're not just learning information, you're learning how to learn. and learning how to step outside the scope of what you've been taught. And you're often facing problems that are based on things that you haven't actually directly learned. And you have to step outside of your comfort zone and educate yourself in order to solve those. So that's something that I believe physics in general teaches, and why a fresh undergrad physics student is really capable of doing tons of different things.
Awesome. We can use that for the physics website, right?
Very much so. Physics undergrad students, write it down. That was a really good pitch. Okay. Most surprising career path for a science student that you have seen?
So when I was an undergrad, I was in physics with another student. She was a year older than me, one of the brightest, smartest people I know. I was always trying to learn from her. She was always helping me with my math and my physics stuff, and just a great person. So she did her undergrad physics degree at University of Winnipeg, honors, and then she went on to do a master's in astrophysics at University of Toronto, I believe, and then decided to move out of country and become a baker.
I'm jealous.
Me too.
Awesome. Again, cooking is physics.
Cooking is science.
Science.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, pretty awesome shift in her career path. Really admirable that she found a passion in that, and she made it happen, and she runs a bakery. I'm
so jealous.
That's like, I don't know, it's retirement dreams.
That's awesome. Probably has like a really, really precise scale as well. If you're like measuring down to like the nanogram, like.
I agree.
You'd have to.
Yeah, absolutely. Baking is precise.
Yeah.
Very much so.
So what is one word to describe the future of science careers?
And only one.
Integrated.
That's really good. That's awesome.
And if I can go beyond one
Absolutely.
word.
Please go ahead and explain.
Everything seems to be multidisciplinary now. It's just more and more common. All these scientific discoveries hinge on each other. There was a famous physicist who said we're all standing on the shoulders of giants, right? And so everything we do in a way has to relate to something else. Maybe it has input from a different field, biochemistry, biophysics, chemical physics, engineering, all these different things. Computer science is basically ubiquitous in everything now.
Very much so.
We see this with computer programming, with artificial intelligence, which is kind of a buzzword, AI, but it's everywhere right now, and it's increasingly important, and it's being integrated into everything from fundamental research to medicine to everyday utilities, Google Maps, you name it. It's there. So I'd say, for me, the future of science and science careers is integrated, and it's collaborative, and it's multidisciplinary.
Well, thank you so much for being here today. Really, we both learned a lot, and really appreciate your time for being here today with us.
It was my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely.
Oh, thank you so much for coming. Yeah.
That's a wrap on episode 3. Thank you so much to our listeners, and thank you for being with us today. Thank you for everybody who joined us. And thank you to our colleague behind the scene, Camille Pakamalan. Please join us for the next episode. We will be covering topics from student experience all the way to research and industry. And if you enjoyed this episode, please give us a review. Until the next time, remember to discover the unknown and invent the future.